Hello there. My name is Sue Schneider, and we're having this session of SBC Leaders Podcast with Gerard Daffy, who is been a mainstay in the Australian sports betting and racing world for a while. So, welcome to the program, Gerard. Love to have you on.
Hello, Sue. Yes, it has been a while, hasn't it?
It has been. It has been. I wonder if you could start out with just a little bit of background on, how you got started in the industry, and then we're going to work our way up into the mid '90s, where we're going to start talking about internet gaming.
Yeah, well, it's been a lifetime ago now since I first got involved. I'm coming up 68, and when I was 12 years of age, I started training greyhounds. You might ask why. My dad, he was president of the local greyhound club in Victoria. He worked on Thursday nights and Saturdays for bookmakers as a ledger writer. So he'd write the bets in the ledger for those bookies. It was a part-time job. We didn't have a lot of money, and he worked there. He was always involved in greyhounds, so it was a natural progression that I got some. And then following on from that, I started to get really interested in the pricing of greyhounds. By the time I was 15 or 16, I was doing analysis and selling my prices to local bookmakers. Then I started doing some work in the local newspapers for pricing and tipping, etc. When I passed year 12, I figured a 9-to-5 job wasn't for me. I went much to my mother's abhorrence, went to work on racetracks for bookmakers. You could work every day or most nights on either racing, greyhounds or harness racing. So that was a full-time job for me. And that led to 1992, late 1992, when they first licensed sports betting in the Northern Territory. There were 2 licenses given. The first one was for Centre Bet. That was December 1992. So that was the first time, aside from horse racing, that you could do anything else. So that was the license. Guy had it for a couple of weeks, Terry Lillis. He was an entrepreneur. He actually built a lot of the roads in the Northern Territory. Anyone who's been there would know the roads from Alice Springs to Uluru or Ayers Rock. He built those. But he always had a passion for wagering. He got the license. There was he and another guy from Sydney, but it became obvious to Terry that after a couple of weeks, he didn't have the in-depth knowledge of sports betting, which I had a little bit of a background in. So he, conned me into going to Alice Springs to have a look at his little operation, and it was a little operation. We spent a week drinking, eating, as you would know, only Terry could do it that way. He talked me into coming back. I was back in 2 weeks' time, only the 3 of us, and then it grew to where it did.
And the rest is history. I didn't realize you started quite that young, so that's interesting. Talk a little bit. I guess I started getting familiar with CenterBet and you guys, and probably I don't know exactly when you started with the internet, but 96, 97, somewhere in there, I think. So can you talk a little bit about that part of the history, because I think a lot of people don't realize that the Northern Territories was such a hub.
Yeah, so how that all came about was there was a primitive form of sports betting in Victoria where you could go to the horse races and have a bet with a bookie there on sport. But if you had a bet and it won, you'd have to go back the next week and collect. So that was very primitive. There was some form of sports betting in Darwin, but that first licence in Alice Springs, so they granted that, and then a couple of months later they granted one in Darwin. And if you have a look at a map of Australia and you see Alice Springs, it's a big country and it's right in the middle, about 20,000 people. So we had the licence, and nobody thought we'd ever get to the stage that it did. So the governments did a deal with the local racetracks, one in Alice Springs, one in Darwin, that they would be the beneficiaries of turnover tax, thinking in the first year, we might turn over maybe 10 million. Well, in the first year, we turned over 50 million. It was all by hand. We'd take phone calls, write the bets on a bit of paper, put them into a ledger if we had time, or on the card of a customer, go back the next day and result it. And then it took about 12 or 18 months before we got that onto a computer of some form. But then we were very, very lucky in so much as in early 1996, we were contacted by a couple of university dropouts from Denmark. And by then we'd had a static website. I didn't know anything about how it worked, but a guy that worked with us, he built it. And these guys from Denmark said, look, we've come across your site. You seem to be able to bet on everything over there. What about we come and help you? We'll convert your site to Danish, and then subsequent to that, it went to Swedish, Norwegian and Finnish. And we can start betting on local football leagues or things that are attractive to Denmark. And I said to him, do people in Denmark bet? And he said, oh yeah, there's a national betting company there, like there is, or there was in most countries. And he said, but they're limited in what they can do. You can only bet on local football and the main league and also English Premier League, and that's it. And you can only take parlays, no single bets. So we got involved with him, and yeah, we converted the website to Danish. We were taking bets in Danish kroner. We built up a really good relationship with he and several others. And then just one by one, the other Scandinavian countries, we were contacted by people from there. And it really did give us the boost that we wanted, because up until then, we were just betting on local football, rugby league and Aussie rules in Australia. We had other prices up, but we didn't have that critical mass. So that was the kickstart that we needed. And the first bet, August 1996, from an expat living in Washington who had a bet on an AFL game that Friday night. So when we saw that, unannounced, we didn't market it or anything, I just knew straight away this was going to work.
And can you talk a little bit, too, in terms of how things were structured then? There were corporate bookmakers, there were the TABs, because I think a lot of people aren't familiar with that. So talk about how that was set up.
Well, as I said, when it started, there was Centrebet in Alice Springs and a couple of months later, Sportsbet in Darwin. The other states in Australia didn't want to touch sports betting because they thought it would be a waste of time. Well, how wrong they were. A few years later, the New South Wales tab and the Victorian tab, bearing in mind that the TABs, or the government-run agencies in those days, this was before they were all privatised, so they were actually government-run. So they started to licence those. After that, there were a few more licensees approached the Northern Territory government, where we were licensed to get a licence, and they were granted that. And then one by one, the states started to fold. So now you can pretty much get a licence in any of the states in Australia. However, there's different rules and regulations and tax regimes around a lot of those, and they're unattractive. So that's why most of them are licensed based in the Northern Territory, a couple in New South Wales, there's more than a couple now in Victoria. So that's how it started. So what we have seen in the last, I know I'm jumping forward here, but in the last few years, we've seen an influx of bookmakers. Now, there were hundreds and hundreds of bookmakers who worked on course. By on course, I mean racing, greyhounds and harness in Australia. And that's been the way it's been for over 100 years. But now, because they're diminishing numbers, and they still work on course. If you had a look at, say, Flemington on Saturday, you'll see bookmakers there. Not many now, but they're there. But they also all now have an online presence. So you can operate at the stand on the race course, or if you go away, you can operate from an office for the rest of the week. But the numbers have extrapolated out now hugely. In Australia now, there's over 150 online sports/racing bookmakers.
That's a lot. And the Northern Territory was a very friendly jurisdiction early on. I don't know if it still is, but it certainly was to begin with.
Yes, it was. And that worked for us because, we were the first ones there. We had a charter of events that we could bet on. Any time that anything from left field or we come up with an idea, we just approached the government or the regulators, and it was a matter of sending a fax saying, we want to bet on the Iditarod sled race in Canada. And a reply would come back within 10 minutes. That's okay, provided you've got an authenticated website where you can go and get the results of it. So, we were lucky. Some of the big things that we bet early, and I guess it's timely because we've recently had the US election, which was a monstrous betting event for us. But in a few weeks' time, we've got the Australian federal election. So right at the start of this, in February 1993, there was, leading into March, there was an election in Australia, and there'd been no media coverage at all for us or any form of betting. But that was the catalyst for us. You know, we were on most of the major news networks, etc., with the betting on that particular election. Some of the TV crews came out to Alice Springs and did stories on Centrebet. You know, you can bet on football, NFL, whatever you want. All you've got to do is ask and we'll get it on the list. So that list grew pretty quickly. And the other thing, of course, was if you're only betting on two sports, the two Australian codes, it was only a few months a year that they're on. If you lost on those, well, you had 6 months of worrying what to do. So we needed to add something that was attractive not only to our punters in Australia, but also punters overseas, but also trying to get into that critical mass and basically teaching people that, you know, if you wanted to have a wager on something, we were the place.
And what about the racing side? Talk about that a little bit, please.
Well, racing was the domain of those on course at the race courses. But that changed in late 1999 when they changed the legislation to allow the sports bookmakers also in the Northern Territory to bet on racing as well. Once again, it was in a primitive form in the early days. It's not like what it is now. You know, you can bet on race meetings 3 or 4 days out, fixed odds, and obviously the tote product as well. So that's how that came about. At the moment, it probably runs about 50-50, 50% sports betting, 50% racing. But you've got to understand in Australia that racing has had such a huge background in people's lives, particularly locally. It's not just a matter of, you know, we've got 6 or 8 race courses. There's hundreds of them scattered all over Australia. They're a real social event. People, you know, on the weekends go to their local race meeting or whatever. So that was ingrained in them. That what we did was we took it to the online area where you could have a bet on that horse or any horse that you liked, really.
And I always remember even early on, you guys had figured out, you know, how to market that in terms of pushing out information. You know that this particular bettor likes that horse, and so you can let them know, hey, they're running in this race. So I mean, it's amazing how precocious, really, in some ways, your industry was there. It really was way ahead of the pack.
Well, it was. And when you consider where we were, you know, I'm always proud of what we were able to achieve in those early days. Most of what I'm just going to mention now would have come anyway. However, Terry was a real entrepreneur. I was a lot more on the conservative side, so I always tried to look at things analytically and say, oh, I don't know whether we should do that, or maybe we could do this. So just a few things that we started. You know, we were the first in the world to go 24/7 live betting, either over the phone or over the internet. You know, that was mainly on cricket and soccer. Multilingual website, multi-currency website. So not only did we deal with those Scandinavian currencies, but also other currencies in the world. Customer service. So in Alice Springs, we had our little own customer service area where we recruited people from overseas to service those particular countries. We started doing a lot of exotics, parlays and the likes. And the other thing that we did, which has really gone unnoticed, is that early on we started using a lot of the girls that worked for us as female traders, and they were really, really switched on, and it worked well. And somebody asked me a few months ago, why do you think that was? And I think mainly what that was that the girls had no bias. You know, it's pretty easy to find a male bookmaker or trader who's biased one way or the other, and you've got to really belt that out of them if you want them to be successful. But the girls were really good. So, as I said, most of it would have come anyway. But you know, we broke ground, and considering where we were, where we lived in the world, it's pretty good.
Yeah, you were literally out in the middle of nowhere. Having been there twice and put on events there several times. It's a beautiful spot, though. I love that area. One of the other things that I think a lot of people don't realize is that's really the extent of the betting products that Australian operators can do online. You can't really do casino games online there.
No, that's been outlawed ever since day one. There were changes to the online sports betting as well. Up until 2008, it was actually illegal for bookmakers in Australia to advertise. But that worked in our favour because I created a lot of links with the media in the early days, and we didn't have to pay any money to advertise. And if they wanted to go to man for anything at all in regards to betting, either the history of it, or a horse in today, or a football match at the weekend, or if there was any big news, particularly around things like elections, I became the go-to man. So we were pretty fortunate in that regards. But then in 2008, the federal government relaxed some of the laws surrounding that. So you could advertise. Up until then, it was against the Constitution, but they had some legal advice that wasn't really the case. So all of a sudden, there was a massive influx of advertising. With that came regulations around product fees having to be paid to the individual sports. And the individual sports, they had the say on what you could and couldn't bet on. So there are some particular bet types on sports in Australia-based, that we're not allowed to bet on, although operators overseas, they can, which is a little bit ironic. But anyway, that's the way that it is, and that's the way that we deal with it. Those codes work closely now with the federal government and also the state governments. If you're not aware of it, there's been a lot of talk in Australia over the last 3 or 4 years about those ads on TV and in the media. There's been a big influx of them, particularly as the numbers of licensees have grown. And, people are sick of it. You watch any TV show at all, and at the ad break, guaranteed there'll be at least one, maybe sometimes 2 or 3 bookies. And during sports events as well, live sports events, and they say, the critics say that, that's promoting gambling to minors. Well, I don't think anybody would argue with that. So some of those rules have changed as well. The federal government recently underwent some submissions in regards to whether gambling advertisements should be outlawed altogether. That's on hold at the moment until this election takes place. They've made a few changes, but I think something big's coming in the next 2 or 3 years because people are sick of betting ads.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's global. I mean, it was certainly the case here in the U.S. also. So I mentioned to you when we were prepping for this call that I remember a very spirited debate over one of the dinners at our event there in Alice Springs. And this was very early on about in-game betting or live betting. And it really got into a very heated discussion on, is that something that is more addictive? Those kind of discussions. So how is that all sorted out there in terms of those kind of issues?
I think it's pretty obvious that it affects it. Up until 2008, when those laws changed, you very rarely came across a problem gambler in sport, and there was a couple of reasons for that. There was no instant fix with sport. If you had a bet on one of the football codes, it wasn't until the weekend. Whereas obviously if you're playing poker machines, you could play them now or whatever, or casino games. So sports betting to some degree was isolated from that. But what then happened was in-play betting or in-the-run betting. So up until maybe late 1990, you just have a bet on before a game started and the occasional bet before a game. But as these systems started to become more automated, you have a look at the tab site now and there'll be an NBA game on. There's probably 500 or 600 individual bet types on one game only. So there's plenty there for punters to pick and choose from. I didn't have any issue with it because it's buyer beware. You're watching the event, you're pretty aware of what the price should be. Has the bookmaker made a mistake? Yes, maybe no. But I think the bookies in the UK found out that it was a monstrous event, and there's probably a lot more betting now on soccer than there was pre-game.
That is the case. I think a lot of the operators, at least in the U.S., find that that's a large part of their activity is in game like that. The other thing that we had kind of talked about a little bit yesterday was about bonuses and that issue. So talk a little bit about how that may have evolved over the years.
Well, it's gone to a new level in the last year or two, and that's another reason that people are really annoyed at it. Some of the laws have changed now, so it's basically against the law in Australia to incentivise somebody to open an account to bet. As an example, open an account with me today and I'll give you $100 to bet with. That's outlawed. So if you're a current account holder, there are promotions around that you can then offer those, including things like that. But that was the first stepping stone to stopping people from being incentivised. Now, I see in the US, it's a big issue now. It's got to be becoming very, very expensive for a lot of these operators globally. I can remember when we first went on the internet in Alice Springs at Centrebet, we spent a lot of time on trying to ascertain the cost of a new client. And in those days, and I'm going back like 25 years, it was $50 or $60. And the lifetime of them was normally around about 12 months. Now, today I'm seeing some of the bonuses and incentives given to some people around the world from some jurisdictions, over $1,000. I don't know how long they have them for, but it's so much easier now, Sue, in this day and age. You open one account, and in the old days, that would be all you'd have. Maybe you have two. But now everybody's got multiple accounts, and it's quite popular for what we call bonus chasers to go from one account to another account to another account, particularly new accounts. You get your wife's account, your neighbour, your son, your daughter. So, there's a lot of money to be made there if you're savvy in that particular area. There's a lot of people actually now chasing bonuses, etc., on a full-time basis. That's their job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And what's happened in the U.S. is as the states have legalized over the last 6+ years, almost 7 now, that they have, successfully lobbied the state legislators to allow that as a marketing expense. So that all comes off the bottom line, which has been kind of controversial because of that, the states are not making as much as they may have expected. So it's been an interesting thing to watch here.
That's not the way it is in Australia, and I suppose, I know it's only relatively new in the US, but you see some things that are on offer or some businesses saying things about incentivising or what we're going to do and whatever, and I think, no, come and visit us and we'll set you straight. But it might be too late for some of those.
Well, I think there may be some changes in the future with that. So, we'll see how it sorts out. Can you talk a little bit about innovations that you've seen over the years? And, you guys were way ahead of the curve and we're doing things early on that have kind of gotten entrenched now. But what sort of innovations have you seen? Because you do have a very mature industry there.
Yeah, well, obviously the internet was the big one, and there's been so many changes to that. But I mentioned it earlier about in-game products. You can go to an NBA or an NFL game now and have 500 individual bet types on that one game, and you can actually couple a lot of those up as parlays or what we call multis. So that's one big one. They're resulted straight away. So what all that has meant was that was a manual process, which obviously we couldn't do that many in the old days. But everybody goes to a third party now, and it's as simple as we sign a deal with the third party. Not only do they build the events for us, you can even get them to manage your books if you like. They result them. They give you late changes. There's information there. Anything at all that you wish to print up or get a report on, you've got it now, which of course accountants love it. In the old days, as I said, that was a manual process. Sometimes you wouldn't even worry about how you'd gone on an event because the next event had started. But as is the case globally now, the finance people, it's big business now. There's obviously some huge costs involved in it, but the people that run finance, they're probably the most important people in the business now. They can find where the flaws are. They can do analysis on if somebody comes at you with a new idea, whether that will work, what will it cost, how do we do it, whatever. So there's been so many changes, Sue, but when you sit down, or when I sit down and think, well, there can't be any more, and along comes something else.
What did you guys do during COVID when there weren't any sports? Were you like here, they were betting on Korean ping pong and, things like that. So what did you do?
Look, that's a good question because sport, like everywhere else, shut down. But they're pretty resilient breed, gamblers, aren't they? We started to bet on some of the bigger things that we bet on, African soccer. Some of those countries I didn't even know existed. But like everything in this day and age, if you want to have a bet on anything at all, you can find some form or somebody who'll tip on them. Singapore table tennis was big. We bet on basketball in the Philippines. There was lots and lots of things in parts of the world that didn't shut down due to COVID, but because you can get coverage of these events, that's another thing too. There's very little sport now on around the world that you can't go to a website and actually view it live, stream it live. Who would have thought that would ever happen? And that got everybody through COVID. So it was interesting times for sure.
And talk about what you've been doing the last few years, because you're not done yet.
Oh, I don't know about that. A couple of times I've been pretty close to being done, but I don't know. I mean, I love it. I'm a 7 days a week man. Always have been. Always sitting in front of a computer looking at prices or whatever's going on else and around the world. I was just fascinated by the whole global wagering thing, and I've been fortunate enough down through the years to have so many contacts like yourself in various parts of it. Just keep in contact with them to find out what's going on. What happened, after I left Centrebet, I decided I just needed something else after doing that, and I got involved with a couple of smaller operators. That didn't work. And then around about 13 or 14 years ago, I was contacted by the Queensland tab. There was 3 separate tabs at that particular point in time by the guys that run that, who I knew. I'd had a relationship with them. And they said, look, we're here on the lookout. We want somebody to come and do our media. We don't really have any expertise or feet in the door in that particular area. Do you want to come and work for us? So I came up to Brisbane and met them, and we did a deal, and I started doing that, tried to expand their media coverage, not only in Queensland, and also their other licences around Australia, but also on other things as well. I also dabbled in some fixed odds. I still keep my finger pretty much on the pulse in regards to the Australian footy codes. And the other thing too was that, you sort of forget what you've been involved in, but because I had such a solid background in the legislation process in the Northern Territory, dealing with those regulators, got to do that in Queensland, marketing ideas and things like that. So that worked well. Then 5 or 6 years ago, that tab merged with Super Tab, New South Wales tab, which was one big entity. So it all became one place. Now, again, just due to the relationships that I had, they signed me on there. So basically for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been doing media for TAB, the length and breadth of Australia. We do have 2 radio stations in Australia where there's a lot of live content on there regarding sport or races. So I go on there and talk about betting moves or plunges or whatever, or just general information. The other advantage I have is that because I've got the history, there's always people asking, when did this happen, or why can't you do this, that type of thing. So, that's my job these days. I'm lucky that I can do it all from home. Again, it's still 7 days a week, but I wouldn't have it any other way, because when my time's up, and it's got to be up soon, surely, I'll still be doing it. I'll still be watching sport and racing every day, and I'll still be keeping an eye on what's going on in the gambling world.
That's great. That's great. Except you are going to come over and take a riverboat ride. I do know that. One of the last question I have for you just is kind of having you dust off your crystal ball and talk about where you think the industry is headed.
Just on that river cruise, I said to my wife yesterday, because she was listening to me talking to you, and she said, when are we going to the Mississippi? And I said, well, we're going to do it, We went to the US about mid-90s. We had 3 little children then who are now grown up and they've got their own kids. But love to get back over there. Made a lot of friends. Actually, I should have mentioned him. Roxy Roxburgh was one of the first guys that we came in contact with in the USA, and we're still friends to this day. So would love to get over there, have a look at the Mississippi and go to a few other places. What's going to happen? Look, I don't really know. I sit there and think sometimes they can't invent any more things to bet on, surely. The internet's where it is. The information that people can have access to, most of it free, vision is free. So what I think is going to happen is there'll be a closing of the doors in some places. Now, I mentioned 160 online bookmakers in Australia. Way too many. There's going to be casualties there because if you start up, the only way that you can get a client today off one of those other 160 is to offer them money, whether it be in bonus bets, etc. It's not cost effective. You've got to have deep pockets. So I think there'll be a lot of casualties here. It's been interesting looking in the USA. Obviously, you've got the 2 big ones, DraftKings and FanDuel, and a few others on the fringe who have chewed up most of the market. There's still some that think that they can get there. There's still a couple of big states to come. California is a big one. But I think what will happen, just reading between the lines, is that the public over there who don't bet or don't wager, and those who perhaps do have an issue with it, they're going to come down hard on governments or regulators and try and get some sort of limit on what you can do with a lot of these operators, because pretty much they've had a free rein up until now. It's in its infancy, but I think their turn is coming over there.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised. Well, we're going to need to wrap up. So I'm so pleased that you came on and we could catch up. And best of luck with your other efforts there. And I would like to thank you all for watching.